What if I told you that the man who reduced the universe to equations also wrote letters about the soul? What if Einstein, the symbol of scientific rationalism, the destroyer of absolute time, the man who showed that matter is energy and space curves around mass, also wrestled with questions about consciousness, spirit, and what survives death? And what if these letters, kept private for decades, sealed at my own request, reveal a side of Einstein no one talks about? A man who wondered whether physics could touch the deepest mystery of all, the nature of the soul. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share will shock you. Not because I believed in religious souls or afterlives in the traditional sense, but because I couldn't dismiss the question, couldn't reduce consciousness to mere matter, couldn't explain away the feeling that there's something more, something that physics doesn't capture, something that might persist beyond death. These letters were never meant for publication. They contain my deepest uncertainties, my private speculations, my admissions that science doesn't have all the answers. And today, I'm revealing what I wrote, what I wondered, what I could never quite resolve about the soul. My name is Albert Einstein, and I'm going to tell you something that contradicts the image you have of me. The rational scientist, the materialist, the man who believed only in what could be measured and proven. That image is partially true. I was those things, but I was also something else, something more conflicted, more uncertain, more open to mysteries than anyone knew, because I wrestled with the question of the soul. Not the religious soul, not the Christian or Jewish concept of an immortal spirit that goes to heaven or hell, but something else, something harder to define. The question of whether consciousness is reducible to matter, whether subjective experience can be explained by physics, whether there's something about being aware, about having an inner life that transcends the physical. And I never resolved this question, never found an answer that satisfied me. But I wrote about it in private letters to close friends, to people I trusted wouldn't judge me, wouldn't dismiss me as having gone soft, having abandoned reason. And those letters reveal a side of Einstein that the public never saw. A man uncertain, questioning, open to possibilities beyond physics. That's what I'm sharing today. The secret Einstein, the uncertain Einstein, the Einstein who wondered about the soul.
Let me start with a letter I wrote in 1936 to a philosopher friend, someone I could be honest with, someone who wouldn't mock me. I wrote, "I confess that I am troubled by consciousness, by the fact that there is something it is like to be me. Physics can describe the brain, the neurons firing, the electrical impulses, the chemical reactions, but it cannot describe what it feels like, the subjective experience, the inner life. And I wonder if this gap is fundamental, if consciousness is something that physics will never capture, not because we lack the tools, but because it's beyond physics, something else entirely." This was radical for me, admitting that physics might have limits, that something might exist beyond what equations can describe. But I couldn't deny what I experienced, what every conscious being experiences, this inner life, this subjective reality. And the more I tried to reduce it to physics, the more inadequate physics seemed. It could describe correlates, could map which brain regions activate during certain experiences, but it couldn't describe the experience itself, couldn't capture what it's like. And that gap troubled me, made me wonder whether consciousness, the soul, if you will, was something more than matter. In another letter from 1941, I wrote something even more provocative. When I look at the universe, when I see the mathematical order underlying everything, I cannot believe this is accident, cannot believe consciousness arose by chance from unconscious matter. It seems more likely that consciousness is fundamental, that it's woven into the fabric of reality itself, not produced by brains, but localized by them, focused by them, like a radio receiving a signal rather than generating it. This is the transmitter theory of consciousness, the idea that brains don't create consciousness, but receive it, filter it, focus it into individual experiences. And when the brain dies, consciousness doesn't end, it just stops being localized, returns to the universal field. Like a radio being turned off, the signal continues, just not in that particular receiver. I couldn't prove this, had no evidence, no experiments, no mathematics, just intuition and experience. The mystical experience I had in the Alps, the dissolution of self, the sense of unity with everything. That experience suggested to me that individual consciousness might be temporary, localized, but that consciousness itself, the universal field, is eternal, fundamental, and that when we die, we return to it, not as individuals, but as the universal awareness we always were, beneath the temporary localization.
Now I know what you're thinking. Einstein, this sounds like mysticism, like religion, like abandoning science for wishful thinking. And maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe consciousness really is just neurons firing, just an emergent property of complexity, just matter arranged in certain ways. And when the arrangement breaks down, consciousness ends, forever, oblivion, nothing. That's the materialist view, the standard scientific view. And I mostly accepted it, publicly, in my professional work. But privately, in these letters, I admitted doubt, admitted that maybe there's more. Maybe consciousness is not reducible. Maybe the soul, understood as the essential nature of awareness, is real. And maybe it doesn't die when the body dies. I couldn't prove this, but I couldn't dismiss it either. Because the hard problem of consciousness, the explanatory gap between physical processes and subjective experience, that gap is real, and no amount of neuroscience has closed it. We can map the brain, can understand neural correlates, but we cannot explain why there's something it's like to be conscious, why there's subjective experience at all. And that mystery, that gap, it leaves room for something more, for the possibility that consciousness is fundamental, that the soul is real. Let me tell you about another letter, this one from 1947, written to a widow who had lost her husband, a colleague of mine, and she asked me, through tears I imagine, whether there was any hope, any possibility that her husband still existed somewhere, that they might meet again. And I could have given her the standard materialist answer, that death is the end, that consciousness ceases, that there is no afterlife, no reunion, just memory, and then eventually, when she dies, nothing. But I didn't say that, because I wasn't certain, and because I wanted to offer comfort without lying. So I wrote, I cannot tell you that your husband's consciousness continues. I don't know. No one knows. But I can tell you this. He existed. He was conscious. He experienced life. And those experiences, that consciousness, they are part of the eternal structure of space-time. His world line from birth to death exists forever, not in time, but as part of the timeless reality. And in that sense, he is not gone. He is eternally present in the moments he lived, including the moments he shared with you. Those moments exist forever, and that's a kind of immortality, not continued experience, but eternal existence. And maybe, just maybe, consciousness is more than we understand. Maybe it's fundamental. Maybe it persists. I don't know. But I don't know that it doesn't, and that uncertainty is better than false certainty. It leaves room for hope.
This letter was never published, kept private by the recipient. only discovered decades later. And it reveals something important. I wasn't the confident materialist everyone thought. I was uncertain, questioning, open to possibilities I couldn't prove. And I think that's wisdom. Not knowing, but admitting you don't know. Not pretending certainty when uncertainty is honest. The question of the soul, of consciousness, of what happens after death, these are mysteries, real mysteries. And pretending we have answers when we don't, that's dishonest. It's better to admit uncertainty, to say, I don't know, to leave room for mystery, for possibility, for hope. That's what I did in these letters, and that's what I'm doing now, sharing the uncertain Einstein, the Einstein who wondered about the soul, who couldn't reduce consciousness to matter, who left room for something more. Let me tell you about one more letter, this one from 1952, 3 years before I died, written to a young physicist who had asked me directly, Professor Einstein, do you believe in the soul? And I wrote, define soul. If you mean an immortal ghost that goes to heaven, no, I don't believe in that. But if you mean the essential nature of consciousness, the subjective experience of being aware, then yes, I believe in that. I experience it every day, and I don't understand it, can't explain it, can't reduce it to physics. And that troubles me, because it suggests that physics is incomplete, that there's something real, something undeniable that our equations don't capture. Some call this the soul. I prefer to call it consciousness, or awareness, or subjective experience. But whatever word we use, it's real, and it's mysterious, and maybe, just maybe, it's fundamental. Maybe it's not produced by matter, but is as basic as matter, as basic as space and time and energy. And if that's true, then maybe it doesn't end when the brain dies. Maybe it transforms, changes form, continues in some way we can't understand. I don't know, can't prove it, but I can't rule it out either, and that's my honest answer.
This is the most explicit statement I ever made about the soul, and it's careful, nuanced, not claiming certainty, but not dismissing possibility. This is the stance I arrived at after a lifetime of thinking, after all my physics, after all my understanding of the universe. I came to this. Consciousness is real, mysterious, possibly fundamental, and possibly not reducible to matter. That's not religion, not mysticism, not abandoning science. It's just honest acknowledgement of what we don't know, of what might be, of the mystery that remains even after all our physics. And if there is a soul, if consciousness is fundamental and persists somehow, then death is not the end, not complete oblivion, but transformation, change, continuation in some form, not as an individual ego, not as Einstein continuing to think and experience, but as consciousness itself, the universal awareness, eternal, fundamental. And we, you and I, we're temporary localizations of that consciousness, temporary waves in the eternal ocean. And when we die, the wave dissolves, but the ocean remains, and we were always the ocean, just temporarily appearing as waves. That's my best guess, my intuition, not proven, not certain, but possible, and strangely comforting. Now let me ask you something, because I want to know what you think. Do you believe in the soul, however you define it? Do you think consciousness is reducible to matter, or is it something more, something fundamental, something that might persist? Leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, because this is the deepest question, the most important mystery, and we're all wrestling with it, all wondering what we are, what consciousness is, what happens when we die.
And maybe by sharing our thoughts, our uncertainties, our hopes and fears, maybe we can help each other, can support each other in this mystery, can be less alone in our uncertainty. So share, tell me what you believe, or don't believe, or wonder about. Let's explore this together.
Let me tell you what I think the implications are. If consciousness is fundamental, if the soul is real in this sense, it changes everything. It means you're not just matter, not just a body, not just a brain. You're consciousness itself, temporarily localized, temporarily experiencing this particular life, but fundamentally, eternally, you're the universal awareness, the cosmic consciousness, the soul of the universe, if you want to call it that. And this should change how you live, how you see yourself, how you relate to others. Because if we're all temporary localizations of the same universal consciousness, then we're not separate, not really. At the deepest level, we're one. We're the same consciousness experiencing itself from different perspectives. And harming another is harming yourself. Loving another is loving yourself. Not metaphorically, actually. We're one consciousness, temporarily appearing as many. And recognizing this, really understanding it, that creates compassion, empathy, unity. Because you see yourself in everyone. See that there's no real separation, just the appearance of separation, just the temporary localization that makes it seem like we're different beings. But beneath that appearance, we're one. We're the same soul, the same consciousness, the same awareness. And that's profound, that's transformative, that changes everything.
And if consciousness persists after death, if the soul is eternal, then death is not the tragedy we think it is. It's transition, transformation, the wave returning to the ocean, the localization ending, but the consciousness continuing. Not as you, not as your individual ego and memories and personality. Those are temporary, part of the localization. But the consciousness itself, the awareness, that continues, returns to the universal field, becomes available for new localizations, new experiences, new lives perhaps, or just remains as universal awareness, experiencing everything, everywhere, always. This is not reincarnation in the traditional sense, not your soul going into another body, but consciousness itself creating new temporary localizations, new experiences, and you were one of those. And when you die, the consciousness that was temporarily you returns to the source and perhaps becomes other localizations, other experiences, other lives. All of it the same consciousness, the same soul, just appearing in different forms, at different times, in different places. All of it one, all of it eternal, all of it the universe experiencing itself.
This is speculative, I admit that. I have no proof, no experiments, no mathematics, just intuition, experience, and the recognition that consciousness is mysterious, that physics doesn't explain it, that the gap between matter and mind is real, and maybe that gap is evidence that consciousness is more than matter, more than brain, more than physics. Maybe consciousness is fundamental, the soul is real, and we are eternal. Not as individuals, but as the universal consciousness temporarily experiencing individuality. That's my secret belief, my private hope, my intuition after a lifetime of physics, shared now in these secret letters, revealed now to you, not as dogma, not as certainty, but as possibility, as mystery, as the question that physics can't answer, but that each of us must face. What are we? What is consciousness? What is the soul? And what happens when we die?
I don't know, but I think, I wonder, I hope, and I share these thoughts with you, in case they help, in case they offer comfort or perspective, or simply the recognition that even Einstein, the great rationalist, couldn't reduce everything to equations, couldn't eliminate mystery, couldn't dismiss the soul, because consciousness is real, and it's the deepest mystery, and maybe, just maybe, it's eternal. Hit subscribe to keep exploring the mysteries beyond physics.